A millionaire arrives unannounced at lunchtime and can't believe his eyes when he sees the triplet boys, 7 years old, of the housekeeper dining at his table. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The silver BMW 7 Series glided silently through the automatic gate of the mansion in Beverly Hills, its wheels whispering against the wet asphalt of the underground garage. Edward Johnson turned off the engine and remained still for a few seconds, watching through the windshield as raindrops continued to slide down the glass. At 42, he was an elegantly built man with perfectly styled grey hair and brown eyes that rarely revealed emotion. His Italian suit, worth $3,000, showed not a single wrinkle, even after a 12-hour direct flight from Frankfurt. The business trip had been a partial success. He had managed to close 2 significant contracts for his import company, but the news about tax irregularities he received over the phone during the flight left him unsettled. 20 years building a commercial empire, and now the IRS was investigating transactions he couldn't even remember authorizing. He took a deep breath, adjusted his navy blue Hermes tie, and stepped out of the car, carrying only an Italian leather briefcase. The private elevator took him directly to the main hall of the 1,200-square-foot residence. The usual silence of the house welcomed him, broken only by the discreet hum of the central air conditioning. Mary, his housekeeper, was probably in the back of the property, attending to routine tasks. The woman was a crucial piece in the perfect machinery of his organized life. She always arrived at 7 in the morning, worked in absolute silence, and disappeared promptly at 5 in the afternoon, like an efficient ghost. Edward walked through the Italian marble corridors, his Oxford shoes echoing slightly against the polished floor. The walls displayed a carefully curated collection of contemporary American art, works by Jeff Koons, Damien Hirst, and Keith Haring that had cost small fortunes, but that he rarely stopped to admire. They were investments, not passions. The minimalist decor in shades of white, grey, and black created an atmosphere of cold sophistication, exactly as he preferred. As he approached the dining room, an unexpected sound made him stop abruptly. Children's voices, low laughter, the clinking of cutlery against porcelain. Edward frowned, ensuring he wasn't imagining things. Not in 5 years, he had never encountered a single person besides Mary in his house. The housekeeper strictly followed the rules established on her first day of work. Absolute discretion, total invisibility, complete silence. His steps became more cautious as he headed toward the entrance of the dining room. What he saw left him completely paralyzed. 3 identical boys, appearing to be 7 or 8 years old, were sitting around his imported mahogany table, calmly eating from French porcelain plates that cost more than $500 each. The triplets wore simple but clean clothes, blue polo shirts and jeans, and their manners at the table were surprisingly refined. "Gabriel, pass the salt, please," said the boy sitting to the right, his voice polite and clear. "Sure, Miguel," replied another, carefully extending the Baccarat crystal salt shaker. "Do you think Mom will take long to come back?" The third boy, clearly the most observant of the trio, looked at his brother with a serious expression. "Raphael, Mom said she had to clean the whole library today. She always takes longer when there are many books to organize." Edward remained still in the doorway, watching the scene with a mix of disbelief and fascination. The boys were eating macaroni and cheese, probably the one Mary prepared on Thursdays, but they did so with a natural elegance that contrasted sharply with their humble origins. They held their cutlery correctly, chewed with their mouths closed, and spoke in low tones, demonstrating a level of education that many children from his own social class lacked. "Boys," Mary's voice echoed from the back hallway, filled with urgency and concern. "Boys, where are you?" Edward saw the instant panic on the triplets' faces. Gabriel, who seemed to be the natural leader of the group, quickly stood up from his chair, his brown eyes wide with fear. "Mom is looking for us," he whispered to his brothers. "She said not to leave the back room." Miguel and Rafael also stood up, but with careful movements, as if they feared breaking something valuable. It was evident they knew exactly where they were and understood the gravity of the situation. Rafael, the youngest by a few minutes, looked directly at Edward and saw him standing in the doorway of the room. "Mom!" he shouted with a trembling voice. "There's a man here!" The sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Mary appeared in the entrance of the room like a storm of nerves and despair. At 35, she was a woman of simple but striking beauty, with brown hair neatly tied in a bun and green eyes that usually conveyed serenity. Now, however, those same eyes were filled with terror. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice choked, her hands visibly trembling. I didn't know you had returned. I can explain, I swear I can explain everything." Edward remained silent, studying the scene before him. Mary was wearing her pristine uniform, a white blouse and black pants, but for the first time in 5 years she did not seem to have complete control of the situation. The 3 boys had unconsciously positioned themselves between their mother and him, like little soldiers ready to defend their family fortress. "The rain," Mary continued, her words coming out in nervous bursts. "It rained so much this morning that the backyard completely flooded. The room where they stay. The water was coming in under the door. I couldn't leave them there. They could get sick. It was just for today, Mr. Johnson. I promise it will never happen again." "How old are they?" Edward finally spoke, his voice controlled but curious. The question caught Mary off guard. She expected shouting, immediate dismissal, perhaps even threats, not a simple question about the age of his children. 7 years old, sir. They were born on the same day, just minutes apart." Edward nodded slowly, his eyes moving between the 3 young faces that watched him with a mix of fear and curiosity. There was something about those boys that intrigued him deeply. It wasn't just their surprising education or dignified demeanor. It was something more subtle, deeper, a brilliant intelligence emanating from their eyes, a premature maturity that spoke of responsibilities taken on too soon. "What are their names?" he asked, addressing the triplets directly. Gabriel, the bravest, stepped forward. "I'm Gabriel, sir. These are my brothers, Michael and Raphael. We apologize for using your table. We didn't want to cause any trouble for Mum." The formality of the response and the genuine concern for their mother's well-being touched something long dormant in Edward's chest. When was the last time someone had shown such loyalty in his presence? When was the last time he had witnessed unconditional love, expressed so purely? "Finish your meal," he finally said, his voice softer than he intended. "Then we'll talk." Mary stared at him in absolute disbelief, as if she couldn't process what she had just heard. Edward Johnson, the man who had fired a previous employee for breaking a $50 cup, was allowing 3 children to finish lunch at his $20,000 dining table. Edward turned and left the room, leaving behind a family in shock and a question that would echo in his mind for the coming months. When was the last time his house had truly felt like a home? Edward retreated to his private office, a stark environment dominated by a solid rosewood desk and shelves filled with chronologically organized financial reports. The walls displayed framed diplomas, an MBA from Harvard, a specialization in international trade from the University of California, and photographs of him greeting influential politicians and business leaders. He sat in his German leather armchair and pretended to review emails on his laptop, but his thoughts remained fixed on the scene in the dining room. For the next 15 years after the divorce, Edward had built a meticulously organized routine that eliminated surprises and inconvenient emotions. He woke up at 5:30, worked out in the private gym on the 10th floor of his corporate penthouse, had coffee alone while reading economic reports, and headed to the office where he led a team of 40 employees. He returned home after 9 in the evening, had dinner while watching international news, and went to bed exactly at 11. Weekends were dedicated to mandatory social events or business trips. The presence of the triplets had shattered this carefully constructed structure like a stone thrown against tempered glass. He couldn't concentrate on the emails about the tax investigation, threatening his company. His stocks had lost 12% of their value in the last 2 months, and the legal department was demanding urgent responses about questionable transactions made by his minority partner. But all of that seemed secondary to the image of the 3 boys eating with natural dignity at his mahogany table. A discreet knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. "Come in," he said, automatically adjusting the upright posture he maintained during all professional interactions. Mary appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with coffee and homemade cookies. Her movements were careful, as if she were walking on thin ice. In 5 years of work, she had never entered the private office without being expressly invited. "Mr. Johnson, I brought your afternoon coffee," she said in a controlled voice, though Edward could sense the tension behind the formality. "The boys finished lunch and are helping to clear the dishes. They know they did something wrong." Edward gestured for her to place the tray on the side table and stay. "Sit down, Mary. We need to talk." The housekeeper hesitated. In 5 years, she had never sat in his presence, except when she signed her employment, a contract. Slowly, she settled into the visitor's chair, keeping her back straight and her hands clasped in her lap. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the boys?" Edward asked, his voice devoid of judgment but filled with genuine curiosity. Mary took a deep breath before responding. "You always made it very clear that you valued your privacy and tranquility. When you hired me, you said you wouldn't tolerate noise, disorder, or personal complications interfering with work. I needed this job, Mr. Johnson. After my husband died in the accident at the construction site, this job became our only source of income. How did you manage to keep them hidden for so long? During the school year, they stay at the public school in our neighborhood in East Los Angeles. I drop them off at 6 in the morning, and my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, picks them up at 5 in the afternoon. During the holidays—" Mary paused, searching for the right words. "I had an arrangement with the building manager where we live. They would stay in the empty party room during the day, studying with materials I took from your library." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Materials from my library?" "Books you never opened again," Mary quickly explained. "Encyclopedias, basic math books, classic literature. I always put everything back in the exact place. The boys are very careful. They never damaged anything. And today it rained so much that the party room completely flooded. The manager said it would take days to dry out. I had nowhere else to leave them, and you were traveling. I thought I could keep them in the back of the house, in the storage room. They are very obedient, Mr. Johnson, but the rain flooded even there." Edward observed Mary carefully. The woman spoke with brutal honesty, not trying to minimize her transgression of the established rules. There was a dignity in her posture that impressed him. Even facing the possibility of dismissal, she did not beg or humiliate herself. "Tell me about them," Edward said, surprising himself with his own interest. Mary's face lit up instantly, as if a light bulb had been turned on in her eyes. "Gabriel is the natural leader. He always looks after the younger siblings, even though he's only a few minutes older. He has an incredible knack for numbers. He can do calculations in his head that I need a calculator for. Michael loves to read. He devours any book he can find, from comic books to encyclopedias. And Ryan—" She smiled with maternal tenderness. Ryan sees the world differently. He draws amazing things, creates fantastic stories, and is always imagining something new. Do they go to public school? Yes, sir. East Los Angeles Elementary School. It's not the best school, but the teachers are dedicated. The boys are always among the top of their class. Edward remained silent for a few minutes, processing the information. For the past 15 years, he had convinced himself that success was synonymous with emotional isolation. Relationships were unnecessary complications that hindered business efficiency. Even his marriage had been more of a strategic partnership than a union based on love. Two influential families consolidating political and economic power. "Where are they now?" he finally asked. "In the library, organizing the books they moved this morning. I taught them that when we use something that isn't ours, we should leave everything even more organized than we found it." Edward nodded, an unexpected idea forming in his mind. "I will talk to them." "Mr. Johnson?" Marcia quickly stood up, alarm evident in her voice. "They are just children. If you want to fire me, I completely understand, but please, don't scare them. They've already been through enough trauma with their father's death." "I am not going to fire you, Marcia," Edward said, surprised by his own decision, "and I won't scare the children. I just want to talk to them." The library occupied the entire second floor of the east wing of the mansion, with mahogany shelves reaching from floor to ceiling and a bronze sliding ladder to reach the higher volumes. Edward had inherited most of the books from his father, an obsessive collector who amassed first editions and rare works without ever having time to read them. Upon entering the room, he found the triplets working in absolute silence. Gabriel was on the ladder, reorganizing volumes of classic philosophy. Michael was carefully flipping through a copy of Dom Casmurro by Machado de Assis, absorbed in reading. Ryan had found a collection of art books and was meticulously copying a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci onto a sheet of paper he had clearly brought from home. "Good afternoon," Edward said softly, so as not to startle them. The three boys turned simultaneously, like little soldiers in formation. Gabriel quickly descended the ladder, and the three lined up side by side, waiting for instructions. "Do you like to read?" Edward asked, genuinely curious. "Yes, sir," Michael replied, clutching the book by Machado to his chest. "Mom always said that books are windows to worlds we could never truly visit." "And you?" Edward turned to Ryan, pointing at the drawing. "Do you like art?" Ryan blushed slightly, but replied in a firm voice, "I like to draw pretty things. When I draw, I forget that we are poor." The brutal honesty of the answer hit Edward like a punch to the stomach. In his 42 years of life, surrounded by luxury and comfort, he had never met a child so acutely aware of their own socio-economic condition. "And you, Gabriel? What do you like to do the most?" "I like numbers, sir. Numbers don't lie and always make sense. When I grow up, I want to help Mom with the household bills so she doesn't have to worry." Edward observed the three young faces and saw in them a maturity that deeply disturbed him. At 7 years old, they already carried responsibilities and worries that should be exclusive to the adult world. But there was something more, a brilliant intelligence emanating from their eyes, a wasted potential that the American educational system would never be able to develop adequately. "Can I see the drawing?" he asked Ryan. The boy handed him the sheet with trembling hands. The reproduction of Da Vinci's drawing was impressively detailed for a 7-year-old. Every line, every shading had been copied with almost photographic precision. "This is very good," Edward said sincerely. "Very, very good." The smile that lit up Ryan's face was like a ray of sunshine breaking through dark clouds, and Edward felt something strange happen in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in decades, Edward Johnson was genuinely interested in something that did not involve profit or strategic advantage. He was interested in three little human beings who had invaded his perfectly organized world and left indelible footprints on his carefully shielded soul. The following days passed with Edward discreetly observing Marcia and the boys' routine. For a week, he allowed them to stay in the backyard during the daytime, a temporary exception. He could not fully explain. The January rains in Los Angeles had been particularly intense that year, and the community center where they lived was still under renovation after the flood damage. Edward began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. Marcia always arrived with 2 bags in addition to her personal bag. One contained the boys' snack, invariably homemade sandwiches and fruits carefully wrapped in plastic. The other, he discovered by watching from his office window, carried books and notebooks she had bought with her own salary. During lunch, she not only supervised her children's feeding, but conducted true impromptu lessons, teaching math, English, and history, with a dedication that made many elite private tutors seem amateurish. On Thursday of the second week, Edward decided to interrupt his usual routine. Instead of heading directly to the office at 7:30, he stayed in the sunroom adjacent to the kitchen, pretending to read reports while observing the family dynamic through the glass doors. What he witnessed left him deeply disturbed. Gabriel was teaching Ryan how to solve multiplication problems using beans as makeshift abacuses. Michael, as she read aloud excerpts from The Little Prince to the triplets, she used different voices for each character. Mary moved among them, correcting pronunciations, explaining complex concepts with infinite patience, and demonstrating an academic knowledge that drastically contrasted with her occupation as a domestic worker. "Mum," Ryan asked during a pause in the reading, "why was the prince sad when he met the pilot?" Mary sat beside her children at the simple formica table that Edward had bought years ago for the staff area. "Because he was far from home, son. Sometimes, when we're in places different from what we know, we feel lost and lonely." "Like us here at Mr. Johnson's house?" Michael asked with childlike innocence. "No, son, we are not lost. We are working to build a better future. There is a difference between being far from home out of necessity and being lost by choice." Edward felt a tightening in his chest as he realized the subtlety of her explanation. Mary was teaching her children about dignity in work, about purpose and determination, concepts that many adults from their social class had never truly understood. That same day in the afternoon, a call from his chief accountant interrupted an important meeting. The company's financial situation was deteriorating rapidly. The IRS had found significant discrepancies in the statements from the last 3 years, all related to operations coordinated by Robert Smith, his minority partner with 15% of the shares. "Edward, we need to talk urgently," said Henry Davis, the company's accountant for 15 years. "The irregularities are more serious than we thought. Robert may have used the company to launder money from dubious sources." "That's impossible," Edward replied, though a seed of doubt was already germinating in his mind. "I personally review all important contracts." "Not these. Robert used a clause in the partnership agreement that allows transactions of up to $500,000 without prior approval from the majority partner. There were dozens of small transactions that, when added up, total $20 million. Edward hung up the phone with trembling hands. In 20 years of building his business reputation, he had never faced a crisis that threatened not only his wealth, but his personal integrity. If the allegations were confirmed, he could face criminal charges for association with money laundering, even as a victim of manipulation. That night, for the first time in years, Edward couldn't sleep. He walked through the silent mansion, passing the dining room where he had found the triplets a week earlier. The mahogany table shone under the light of the crystal chandelier, but it seemed strangely empty and cold. He headed to the library and found, forgotten on an armchair, the drawing that Ryan had made, a perfect reproduction of the Mona Lisa that the boy had copied from an art book. He sat in the armchair, holding the simple paper as if it were an important legal document. There was tangible proof of an extraordinary talent being wasted due to a lack of opportunities. Ryan, at just 7 years old, demonstrated artistic skills that many fine art students took years to develop. Gabriel solved math problems mentally at a speed that would impress university professors. Michael devoured classic literature with a deep understanding that rivaled high school students, and he, Edward Johnson, with all the financial resources in the world, was facing the possibility of losing everything due to greed and negligence. The irony was cruel. A family of worthy poor demonstrated true wealth, while he, surrounded by luxury, discovered the fragility of his fortune built on questionable foundations. The next morning, Edward made a decision that surprised him. Instead of going directly to the office to face the financial crisis, he headed to East Los Angeles for the first time in his life. He needed to see where Mary and the boys lived, to understand the reality of their lives beyond the walls of his mansion. The drive in the BMW through the peripheral neighborhoods of Los Angeles was a journey through a country he knew only through economic statistics and sociological reports. The narrow streets, simple houses, local commerce, and crowds circulating through public transport created an urban mosaic completely alien to his life experience. When he finally located Mary's address, a 5-story building constructed by the Affordable Housing Program, Edward remained in the car for several minutes, processing the brutal contrast between that environment and his mansion in Beverly Hills. The building was well-maintained but clearly modest, with 50-square-meter apartments housing entire families. Edward observed children playing in the small central playground, women hanging clothes on balconies, and men returning from work in uniforms from cleaning, security, and construction companies. It was a microcosm of hard-working America that he had never personally experienced. When Mary appeared at the third-floor window and saw him standing next to the BMW, the look of panic on her face was visible even from a distance. She disappeared from the window and appeared at the ground floor in less than 2 minutes, running toward the car with the 3 boys behind her. "Mr. Johnson," she said, breathless with nervousness, "is something wrong? Why did you come here?" Edward got out of the car and observed the triplets, who wore pristine school uniforms despite the simplicity of the fabric. Even in their familiar environment, they maintained the respectful and polite demeanor he had noticed in the mansion. "I wanted to see where you live," he said simply, still processing the experience of being there. "Do you want to come up?" Mary asked hesitantly, clearly embarrassed by the modesty of her home. Edward nodded, and the walk to the 3rd floor was a revelation. The 2-bedroom apartment was small, but incredibly organized. The combined living room and kitchen displayed simple yet well-kept furniture, walls decorated with the boys' drawings framed in inexpensive but thoughtful frames. A small plywood bookshelf housed dozens of used books, all organized by author and theme. What impressed Edward the most was the makeshift study area in the boys' room. A simple wooden table served as a desk. In the center of the room, there was a small table with 3 plastic chairs arranged around it, stacks of notebooks, pencils organized in repurposed butter containers, and maps of the United States taped to the wall created a learning environment that rivaled the organization of any elite private library. "The boys study here every night," Mary explained, pride evident in her voice. 2 hours of homework, 1 hour of free reading, and 1 hour of creative activities. On weekends, we visit public libraries and free museums. Edward sat in one of the plastic chairs and observed the notebooks scattered across the table. The pages revealed neat handwriting, correctly solved math exercises, and essays that demonstrated advanced vocabulary for 7-year-olds. In that 50-square-foot space, a more solid and dedicated education was taking place than in many elite private schools he knew. "Mary," Edward finally said, "we need to talk." And for the first time in years, Edward Johnson was ready for a conversation that didn't involve profit, business strategy, or competitive advantage. He was ready to talk about values, opportunities, and social responsibility with a woman who, he was now discovering, was infinitely richer than he was in everything that truly mattered. Edward stayed in Mary's apartment for almost 2 hours, an eternity considering he had never spent so much time in a social environment without a specific agenda. The triplets, initially shy in his presence in that intimate space, gradually relaxed and began to demonstrate their usual routines. Gabriel meticulously organized his math books, explaining to Edward how he had developed his own system for solving complex problems. Michael recited entire passages from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer that he had memorized, his pronunciation impeccable despite his age. Ryan showed dozens of drawings, kept in an improvised folder, each piece revealing impressive technical evolution. "How do you manage to teach them all this?" Edward asked Mary, while watching Ryan explain the shading techniques he had learned on his own. "I don't teach, Mr. Johnson. I just create opportunities for them to learn," Mary replied, preparing a simple coffee in an Italian coffee maker that clearly had been a valuable gift. "When I was young, before I got married, I took a technical course in accounting. I have always loved numbers and organization. After Antonio passed away," her voice momentarily choked, "I realized that the only real inheritance I could leave for my children was knowledge. No one can take education away." Edward accepted the cup of coffee, noting that the porcelain, although simple, was immaculate. Everything in the apartment reflected the same pattern. Modest but carefully maintained, organized with military precision, and extremely clean. It was evident that Mary applied the same standards of excellence to her home that she demonstrated while working in her mansion. "Why haven't you gone back to working in accounting?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Who is going to hire an accountant who has been out of the market for 10 years? Besides, the boys needed me around. Working as a housekeeper allows me to support the family and still have time to educate them properly. It's a temporary sacrifice." The word temporary echoed in Edward's mind. Mary spoke about her current situation as a transitional phase, not a permanent destination. She had clear goals, a defined strategy, and a long-term vision, qualities he valued in senior executives at his company. "And what is the long-term plan?" Edward asked, settling more comfortably in the plastic chair. Mary smiled, and for the first time since he had known her, Edward saw true joy in her eyes. "When the boys turn 10 and can be left alone safely, I plan to go back to school. I want to study business administration or accounting. I want to open my own consulting firm for small businesses. There are many merchants here in the neighborhood who need help with financial organization but can't afford large accounting firms." Edward watched the 3 boys, who had spontaneously set up a kind of makeshift school in the living room, with Gabriel teaching math to his brothers, using coins as teaching materials. The scene reminded him of his own privileged childhood, when private tutors came to his home to teach subjects he found tedious and irrelevant. "Gabriel," he called gently, "come here for a moment." The boy approached with a respectful posture, but without the fear he had shown in their earlier encounters. "Do you like working with numbers?" "Yes, sir. Numbers are like puzzles that always have a solution. When I solve difficult problems, I feel like I'm discovering secrets of the world." Edward smiled involuntarily. The boy's description echoed his own feelings about financial analysis, but expressed with the childlike poetry he had lost decades ago. "Want to see a real problem I'm trying to solve?" Gabriel nodded enthusiastically, and Edward took out his phone, opening a simplified financial spreadsheet of the company. He explained the basic concepts: revenue, expenses, net profit, investments. Gabriel absorbed every piece of information with intense concentration, asking pertinent questions that surprised Edward with their sophistication. "Mr. Johnson," Gabriel said after studying the numbers for 15 minutes, "there's something strange here. These expenses don't make sense with this revenue." Edward frowned, looking more closely at the spreadsheet. Gabriel was pointing exactly to the discrepancies that had triggered the tax investigation. Transactions he himself had not initially noticed because they were camouflaged in the complexity of the complete reports. "How did you notice this so quickly?" "It's like when Mum does the household accounts. If we spend more than we earn, money has to come from somewhere. But here," Gabriel pointed to a series of debits, "money is going out for no clear reason. It's like someone is taking money secretly." The simplicity of the explanation hit Edward like a bolt of lightning. A 7-year-old child, using basic logic and careful observation, had identified the same problem that would cost thousands in fees for forensic accountants to investigate. At that moment, Edward's phone rang. It was Henry Taylor, his accountant. "Edward, we have news about the investigation. Robert is trying to transfer his shares to third parties. I think he's going to try to flee the country. Henry, I need you to set up an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. I'm going to take over. Complete control of tax operations and terminate the partnership with Robert immediately." "This could cost a lot, Edward. The fines, the lawsuit. I'd rather pay fines than lose my reputation and integrity." "Do whatever it takes." Edward hung up the phone and found 6 pairs of eyes watching him with curiosity. Mary and the 3 boys had listened to the conversation, although only Gabriel seemed to fully grasp the financial context. "Are you facing problems at the company, Mr. Johnson?" Mary asked with genuine concern. "Serious problems. I discovered that my partner was using the company for illegal activities without my knowledge. And now? Now I'll have to rebuild everything from scratch. It will be difficult, but it's the only way to keep my honesty intact." Gabriel approached again, carrying paper and pencils. "Can I help with the calculations? Mom always says that big problems get smaller when we organize them properly on paper." Edward looked at the boy, 7 years old, in a simple school uniform, offering help with a business crisis worth millions, and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. It wasn't pity or condescension, it was genuine respect for a pure intelligence that the American educational system would never be able to develop adequately. "Gabriel, would you like to learn more about numbers and businesses?" "Very much." "And you, Michael, would you like to have access to more books?" "Yes, sir." "Ryan, would you like to learn drawing techniques from professionals?" The boy nearly jumped for joy. "That would be the best gift in the world." Edward turned to Mary, who was watching the scene with an inscrutable expression. "Mary, I have a proposal for you. But first, I need you to answer me honestly. Would you trust me to help with your children's educational development?" Mary studied his face carefully before responding. "You're being sincere with me for the first time in 5 years. I can see in your eyes that this conversation isn't about charity or pity. It's about recognizing value where it exists. Yes, I would trust you. Then let's talk about how we can work together to ensure that Gabriel, Michael and Ryan have the educational opportunities they deserve. And perhaps, in the process, we all learn something about what truly constitutes real wealth. For the first time in 20 years, Edward Johnson was proposing a partnership that didn't have profit as its main goal. He was proposing to invest in human potential simply because it was the right thing to do. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt genuinely rich. Edward's proposal was both simple and revolutionary: to transform part of his mansion into a personalized learning center for the triplets, keeping Mary as the project manager in addition to her usual domestic duties. In return, she would help him reorganize his personal and business finances with the mathematical precision she had demonstrated, while the boys would receive supplemental education with specialized private tutors. "This isn't charity," Edward explained during breakfast in the kitchen of the apartment, a ritual that had become daily over the past 2 weeks. "It's mutual investment. I need someone I trust to help me rebuild my company after Robert's betrayal. You need educational opportunities that the public system can't provide. We'll help each other." Mary served homemade sweetbread that she had prepared at 5 in the morning before waking the boys. Her routine had intensified since Edward began visiting them daily. She woke up at 4:30 to cook, studied basic financial reports he brought, organized educational activities for the children, and still kept the house pristine. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked, showing vulnerability in their conversations for the first time. "What if I can't help with the company's finances? What if the boys don't adapt to the mansion's environment?" "Then we go back to what we were before and try other alternatives," Edward replied sincerely. "But look at Gabriel." The boy was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by old calculators that Edward had brought from his company, solving percentage problems that were normally taught only in high school. In 2 weeks of informal instruction, Gabriel had absorbed mathematical concepts at a speed that even impressed Edward, who held an MBA in business administration. "Look at Michael." The second triplet was on the tiny balcony of the apartment, reading Don Quixote in a youth-adapted edition, but taking notes on symbolism and social criticism that revealed sophisticated literary understanding for his age. "And look at Ryan." The third boy had turned a wall of the bedroom into an improvised gallery, displaying drawings that visibly evolved in technique and complexity each day. His latest works included family portraits created from memory, with a level of detail that bordered on photographic precision. "They have exceptional talents, Mary. Wasting that would be a crime against their future and against society as a whole." That afternoon, Edward implemented the first phase of his plan. He hired Clara Smith, a retired teacher with a PhD in pedagogy from UCLA, to assess the educational level of the triplets and develop a personalized curriculum. The 60-year-old woman, with grey hair pulled back in a tight bun and penetrating blue eyes, arrived at the mansion carrying suitcases filled with tests and teaching materials. "Mr. Johnson," she said after 2 hours of individual assessments with each boy, "these boys are at least 3 years ahead of the national average for their age group. Gabriel has mathematical aptitude that rivals high school students. Michael demonstrates reading comprehension and textual interpretation comparable to first-year college students. And Ryan," she paused, searching for the right words. "Ryan has genuine artistic talent. It's not just technical skill. It's a natural aesthetic vision." Edward nodded, satisfied, but not surprised. "What's your recommendation?" "Personalized education, definitely. The traditional education system would be inadequate for them. They need specific stimuli, specialized teachers, an environment that allows accelerated development without excessive psychological pressure." "Costs?" "To do this correctly, approximately $15,000 per child per month. Specialized teachers, imported teaching materials, equipped laboratories for scientific experiments, workshops. Professional art." "Approved." Mary raised her eyebrows. "Mr. Johnson, this represents $45,000 a month just in education. Mary, over the last 2 years, I've spent more than $100,000 annually maintaining 3 cars that I rarely drive. Investing in quality education for exceptionally talented children seems like a smarter priority. Meanwhile, the crisis in his company continued to deepen. Robert had truly tried to transfer his shares to offshore companies in the Cayman Islands, but the IRS had blocked the transactions in time. The losses caused by the illegal operations amounted to $30 million, and Edward faced the possibility of having to sell personal assets to settle tax debts. "Mr. Johnson," Michael said during one of his evening visits to the apartment, "can I see the company spreadsheets again?" Edward had brought simplified versions of the financial reports, both to keep Michael interested in math and to get a second opinion on the discrepancies discovered. The boy studied the numbers with a concentration that many adults could not maintain. "There's something strange here." Michael pointed to a series of bank transfers. "This money leaves the company, goes somewhere else, and then comes back as if it were new investment. But it's not new investment. It's the same money going in." "Circles." Mary approached to examine the numbers. In 3 weeks of self-study, she had absorbed basic accounting concepts with impressive ease. "Michael is right," she said. "This is money laundering. Someone was making dirty money look like clean investment." Edward studied the spreadsheets with renewed attention. Michael and Mary had identified the pattern of the illegal operations with a clarity that his own accountants had taken weeks to notice. "How did you see this so quickly?" "Because we don't understand complicated laws," Mary explained. "We only understand honesty. If the money is taking strange paths, it's because someone is trying to hide something." Michael nodded vigorously. "It's like when we play hide and seek. Whoever is hiding always makes noise trying to stay quiet." The simplicity of the analogy revealed something fundamental about business leadership to Edward. He had become so involved in the technical complexity of the business that he had lost the ability to apply basic common sense in analyzing suspicious situations. That night, after returning to the mansion, Edward made a decision that surprised even himself. He called Officer John Smith. "John, I want you to prepare a complete restructuring proposal for the company. We're going to break our partnership with Robert, take full responsibility for the tax liabilities, and implement new financial control systems." "Edward, this could cost your personal fortune." "John, over the last 3 years, I've spent $500,000 decorating this house with artworks that I rarely look at. I spent another $200,000 on a car that sits in the garage 90% of the time. If I lose part of my fortune doing the right thing, I will still come out ahead in terms of personal integrity. Are you okay? You seem different." Edward looked around his living room, where everything was perfect, expensive, and cold. Then he thought about Mary's simple apartment, where everything was modest, functional, and full of life. "I'm better than I've been in years, John. I'm learning the difference between having a lot of money and being truly rich." And for the first time in his adult life, Edward Johnson was making decisions based on moral values rather than financial gain. The process would be painful, costly, and complicated, but it would be honest. And honesty, he was now discovering, was a luxury that money could not buy, only reveal. March arrived with an intensity that caught Edward unprepared on all fronts. The restructuring of his company required full presence in the office, but the triplets' first days of school in his mansion created a completely new energy in the environment he called home. In the morning, he woke up to the sounds of children's voices discussing math exercises in the library. During lunch, he returned to find Michael reciting poems by Walt Whitman in the sunroom. At night, Ryan showed him increasingly sophisticated drawings, now produced on special paper with professional pencils, transforming the east wing of the mansion into an educational center. Had cost $40,000 in equipment and renovations. Edward had installed a basic science lab, a youth library with over 500 volumes selected by Clara Smith, and a complete art studio with easels, paints, and sculpture materials. What he had not anticipated was how the constant presence of the children would fundamentally alter the atmosphere of the entire property. "Mr. Johnson," Michael said during dinner on a Thursday, "why is your house so big if you live alone?" The question, posed with absolute childlike innocence, hit Edward like an uncomfortable revelation. For the past 15 years he had expanded the mansion twice, adding rooms that never hosted guests, living rooms that he rarely used, and recreational areas that remained empty most days. "I always thought I needed a lot of space," he replied honestly. "But empty space is not freedom," Michael commented, surprising Edward with the maturity of the observation. "It's loneliness with a fancy address." Mary gently reprimanded her son for his excessive frankness, but Edward raised his hand, indicating that the observation was welcome. "Michael is right," he said simply. "I confused isolation with independence." Meanwhile, in the office, the situation with Robert had escalated to dangerous territory. Investigations revealed that the illegal operations involved not only money laundering, but also tax evasion for criminal organizations. Robert had disappeared, leaving behind a web of financial and legal responsibilities that threatened to destroy everything Edward had built over 2 decades. "Edward, we need to talk urgently," Officer John Smith said during an unannounced visit to the office. The 50-year-old man, with a graying mustache and military posture, carried a briefcase full of official documents. "Robert Almada is being sought for association with a criminal faction that operates money laundering on an international scale." "And how does this affect me?" "You are partners. Technically, you could be considered co-responsible for the operations, even without prior knowledge." Edward felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "Officer, I can prove that I had no knowledge of the illegal activities." "You can prove it, yes, but the process may take years, and in the meantime your company will be frozen and your personal assets may be blocked preventively." "For how long?" 2-3 years, maybe more." Edward returned home that afternoon, carrying the weight of a reality he had never imagined facing. The possibility of losing not only the company, but all the financial resources necessary to continue the educational project for the triplets. Worse still, the possibility that Mary and the boys would be exposed to negative publicity from a criminal trial. He found them in the library, where Clara Smith was conducting a comparative literature class. The 3 boys were debating the differences between The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry and Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, demonstrating an allegorical understanding that impressed even the experienced teacher. Both books talk about adults who have lost the ability to see what is truly important, Gabriel explained to his brothers. "But The Little Prince is sad because he remembers when he understood, and Alice is confused because she never knew there were other ways to see the world." Edward stopped at the entrance of the library, listening to the discussion unnoticed. Gabriel's analysis was deeper than many academic interpretations he had read during his own university education. "And what is the difference between sadness and confusion?" Clara asked, skillfully guiding the discussion. "Sadness means you have been happy before and can be again," Michael replied thoughtfully. "Confusion means you don't know if true happiness exists." "And what do you think happens to adults who become confused about happiness?" Ryan added his artistic perspective. "They build huge but empty houses, buy beautiful things that don't really make them smile." Ryan's observation was so accurate about his own life that Edward had to lean against the doorframe. A 7-year-old had surgically diagnosed the existential void that had taken Edward decades to recognize. That night, After Clara Smith left and the boys retreated to the room specially prepared for them in the mansion, Edward spoke honestly with Mary about the legal crisis he was facing. "I could lose everything, Mary. The company, the house, the resources to continue educating Gabriel, Michael and Ryan." Mary served chamomile tea in simple porcelain cups she had brought from home, creating an intimate atmosphere that contrasted with the formal grandeur of the living room. "And then?" she asked calmly. "What do you mean then?" "After you lose everything material, what remains?" Edward reflected on the question. "Honestly, I don't know. I never thought about it. What remains is who you really are, without the disguises that money allows you to wear." Mary spoke softly but firmly. "What remains is whether you are someone who is respected and loved, for your character, or if you are merely tolerated for your bank account. And what if I discover that I am just the bank account? Then you will have the opportunity to become a real person for the first time in your life." Edward looked at Mary, a woman who had lost her husband, faced poverty, raised 3 children alone, and still found the strength to offer wisdom and emotional support to a privileged man who was belatedly discovering his own limits. "Mary, why do you care about what happens to me?" "Because in the last 3 months, I have watched you transform from a distant boss into a genuine human being. Because my children speak of you with real affection, not just forced respect. And because I believe that good people deserve second chances, regardless of how many zeros they have in their bank account." Edward felt something fundamental reorganize in his chest. For the first time in his life, someone valued him not for what he possessed, but for who he was becoming. "And what if I really lose everything? Then we will build something new together, you, me, and 3 exceptional children who have just discovered that they have unlimited potential. It may not be what we planned, but it will be real." That early morning, Edward stayed awake, looking out the window of his room at the illuminated garden, where a small study table had been set up under a century-old tree. Tomorrow, regardless of the legal and financial consequences, Gabriel would continue solving math problems, Michael would explore new literary universes, and Ryan would create art that touched hearts. And perhaps, for the first time in 42 years, Edward Johnson would discover what it meant to be truly necessary in the lives of others. The storm was just beginning, but he would not face it alone. April brought consequences that Edward had never imagined possible. In the second week of the month, federal officers appeared at his mansion with a search warrant, looking for documents related to Robert Almada's operations. The scene was surreal, men in dark suits rummaging through his library, while Gabriel, Michael and Ryan watched from the second-floor window with Clara Smith, who was trying to turn the traumatic episode into a civic education lesson about how the judicial system works. "Why are the men taking Mr. Johnson's papers?" Ryan asked. The teacher, his big eyes full of concern. "Because when someone does something wrong in business, justice needs to investigate to find the truth," Clara explained carefully. "It's like when you guys fight, and I need to hear all sides of the story before deciding who is right." Michael, always the most observant of the 3, frowned. "But Mr. Johnson didn't do anything wrong. I heard Mom talking to him about the bad numbers that the other man was hiding." "Exactly, Michael. That's why the investigation will prove that Mr. Johnson is innocent, but justice needs to be absolutely sure before making any decisions." Edward watched the scene from the main hall, accompanied by Mary and 2 lawyers he had hired the day before. Seeing the triplets witnessing that situation made him feel a deep shame, not for the investigation itself, but for having exposed innocent children to the consequences of a world, a corrupt and complicated adult. "Dr. Johnson," said Officer Smith, approaching with a folder of documents, "we need you to accompany us for an official statement. It's just a formality, but necessary for the progress of the case." How long will it take? Probably all day, maybe 2 days, depending on the complexity of the questions. Edward looked at Mary, who nodded discreetly. They had discussed this possibility the night before. "Gabriel!" Edward called the oldest of the triplets, who came running down the stairs. "Yes, Mr. Johnson. I need to be away for a few days to resolve this situation. Can you help your mom take care of Michael and Ryan while I'm gone?" Gabriel assumed a serious posture that drastically contrasted with his newly turned 8 years. "You can count on me, Mr. Johnson. I will take care of everyone." The responsibility the boy took on instantly touched Edward in an unexpected way. Gabriel was not just promising to look after his brothers, he was promising to keep the family united during a crisis he couldn't fully understand. The 2 days at the Federal Police Department were a revealing experience for Edward. Interrogated for 6 hours a day, he had to meticulously reconstruct every business decision from the past 5 years, explain every financial transaction, justify every signed contract. The process was exhausting but also cathartic. For the first time in decades, Edward was forced to examine his own business conduct with brutal honesty. "Dr. Johnson," said Officer Fernanda Smith during the second day of questioning, "our investigation confirms that you were unaware of the illegal operations conducted by Mr. Almada. However, there was negligence in your internal control systems that allowed these activities." "I understand. What are the consequences?" "Substantial fines, mandatory restructuring of the company's internal controls, federal oversight for 2 years. But there is no evidence of criminal involvement on your part." Edward felt immense relief, but tempered by the realization that his business reputation would take years to fully recover. When he returned to the mansion on Friday afternoon, he found a scene that deeply moved him. The triplets had transformed the dining room into a family operations center. Gabriel had organized all the household bills into meticulous piles, helping Mary calculate monthly expenses. Michael had prepared a detailed report on the educational activities of the past 2 days, including summaries of the books he had read and analyses of the completed exercises. Ryan had created a series of drawings depicting happy family moments, with Edward at the center of each composition. "Mr. Johnson!" the 3 boys shouted simultaneously, running to hug him with a genuine joy he had never experienced before. "How were the last few days?" he asked, settling at the table where he had previously only eaten alone. "We took care of everything," Gabriel reported proudly. "I helped Mom with the bills. Michael read 3 whole books to us and Ryan drew our family." "Can I see the drawing?" Ryan ran to get a large sheet of cardstock where he had depicted the 5 family members, including Clara Smith as grandma teacher, in a flower-filled garden, all smiling and hugging. In the center of the composition, Edward appeared not as a distant, authoritative figure, but as an integral part of a loving circle. "I draw what I feel," Ryan simply explained, "and I feel that we are a real family now." Mary approached, carrying organized documents in colorful folders. "Edward, while you were away, I completely organized your personal finances. You have enough assets to maintain the boys' education, even if you lose the entire company." "What do you mean?" "You own 3 properties in addition to this house, investments in funds totaling $4 million, and an art collection valued at $2 million. Even after paying all the fines and compensations related to the case, you will still have substantial resources." Edward studied the spreadsheets that Mary had prepared. The organization was pristine, superior to reports he received from professional accountants. "Mary, this is university-level work." "It's the work of someone who truly cares about the outcome," she simply replied. That weekend, Edward made a decision that surprised even himself. He gathered the family, because that's how he now thought of Mary and the triplets, in the library for an important conversation. "These past few months have taught me something fundamental about wealth," he began, observing 5 attentive faces. "I've realized that I spent 40 years accumulating things that didn't make me happy and ignoring experiences that could have transformed my life." "What does that mean?" Michael asked with childlike curiosity. "It means I want to make significant changes. First, I want to formalize our partnership. Mary, I would like you to become the official manager of all my personal finances, with a salary commensurate with that responsibility." Mary looked at him incredulously. "Edward, I don't have a college degree. You have something more valuable, absolute integrity and natural competence. Clara?" The teacher nodded. "Yes, Edward. I would like you to develop a 5-year educational program for Gabriel, Michael and Ryan with an unlimited budget. I want them to have access to the best educational opportunities possible. It would be an honor." Edward took a deep breath before making the final proposal. "And I would like all of you to move here permanently. This house is too big for one person, but the perfect size for a family." The silence that followed was broken by Ryan, who ran to hug him with surprising strength for an 8-year-old. "Does this mean we are an official family now?" he asked, his eyes shining with joy. Edward looked around the library, the same environment where he used to retreat from loneliness, now filled with life, love, and infinite possibilities. "Yes, Ryan, we are an official family now." And for the first time in his life, Edward Johnson fully understood the meaning of the word home. The summer of 2024 brought changes that transformed not only the dynamics of the mansion, but Edward's very identity as a human being. The official move of Mary and the triplets to the residence happened in May, during the school holidays, creating a complex logistics that involved not only the transfer of belongings, the emotional adaptation of 5 people who were completely redefining their family relationships. The west wing of the mansion was remodeled to accommodate the new family configuration. Marissa settled into the master suite on the 2nd floor, a space of 600 square feet that included her own office where she managed Edward's finances with obsessive precision. The triplets shared a specially designed triple suite with 3 rooms connected by a common study area. Clara Smith received an office on the 1st floor that served as a pedagogical center, filled with teaching materials, computers, and a growing library of specialized educational resources. "Mr. Johnson," Gabriel said during breakfast on a Tuesday morning in June, "can I ask a personal question?" Edward, who had developed the habit of having coffee with the family before heading to the office, nodded as he spread strawberry jam on the French bread that Marissa made daily. "Did you always want to have kids?" The question caught Edward completely off guard. In his 43 years of life, he had never seriously reflected on fatherhood. His marriage to Helena had been based on social convenience and professional ambition. Children were a future abstraction that never materialized. "Honestly, Gabriel, I never thought much about it. I was always so focused on working and making money that there wasn't time to think about family." "And now?" Edward looked around the breakfast table, where Michael was reading excerpts from 100 Years of Solitude aloud to Ryan, who was drawing while listening. Marissa was organizing the day's educational schedule with Clara, discussing plans for a field trip to the Los Angeles Museum of Art. The scene radiated a domestic harmony he had never experienced. "Now I've discovered that having a family isn't about wanting kids," he replied thoughtfully. "It's about finding people who make you want to be a better version of yourself every day." Michael looked up from the book. That's exactly what Gabriel Garcia Marquez writes about love. He says that true love isn't a fleeting passion, but a daily decision to care for someone. Michael's mature observation continued to surprise Edward. At 8 years old, The boy demonstrated emotional understanding that many adults took decades to develop. That same day in the office, Edward faced the final chapter of the business crisis. The IRS had concluded its investigation, confirming his innocence in Robert Smith's operations, but imposing a fine of $15 million and requiring a complete restructuring of internal control systems. "Edward," Henry Davis said during an emergency meeting, "we have two options. We can sell the company to a competitor and settle all debts with a reasonable profit, or we can restructure internally and continue operating under federal supervision." What would the sale value be? $80 million net after settling all tax obligations. Edward remained silent for several minutes, processing the implications. Selling the company would mean total financial freedom, but also the end of 20 years building something of his own. Keeping the company would mean years of intense work under constant supervision, but it would preserve his professional legacy. "Henry, I will think about it. I need to talk to my family before deciding." "Your family?" Henry raised his eyebrows, surprised. "You never mentioned having a family." "It's a complicated story, but yes, I now have a family, and important decisions should be made collectively." That night, Edward gathered everyone in the library to discuss the future. He explained the two options with complete honesty, including the financial and personal implications of each choice. "If you sell the company," Marissa said after carefully studying the numbers, "you will have total financial security for the rest of your life. But you will lose something you built with your own hard work." "And if you keep the company?" Gabriel asked, his mathematical mind already calculating possibilities. "It will be a lot of work, a lot of pressure, a lot of government oversight, but I will keep control of what I created." Ryan, who had remained quiet during the discussion, finally spoke. "Mr. Johnson, what would make you feel proud when you look in the mirror?" The question, posed with childlike simplicity, touched on the core of the issue Edward had been avoiding. "You know, Ryan, I think I would feel prouder trying to fix what was broken than simply selling the problem to someone else." "Then the answer is clear," Marissa said softly. "You keep the company, and we help you rebuild it the right way. We? Gabriel can help with financial analysis. I can manage internal controls. Michael can organize all the documentation, and Ryan can create visual materials for presentations. Clara can coordinate a corporate education program for the employees." Edward looked at each face around the library table. A woman without a college degree offering expertise in internal controls, an 8-year-old child proposing financial analysis, another boy suggesting document organization, a third offering graphic design, a retired teacher proposing corporate education. It was the most unlikely team he had ever considered for a multi-million-dollar company. It was also the team he trusted the most. "Are you sure you want to get involved in this? It will be a lot of work, a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility." "Mr. Johnson," Gabriel replied with maturity beyond his years, "family is about sharing both the problems and the joys. You took care of our education when you had no obligation to. Now it's our turn to take care of your dreams." Edward felt tears welling up in his eyes, something that hadn't happened since childhood. They were not tears of sadness or fear, but of deep gratitude for having discovered, at 43, what it truly meant to belong to a family. "Then it's decided," he said with a choked voice. "We will rebuild the company together. And we will do it right this time," Marissa added with determination. "With total honesty," Michael contributed, "and beauty in everything we create," Ryan concluded. Clara Smith watched the scene with a discreet smile. In 50 years of educational career, she had never witnessed a more powerful lesson on family values, teamwork, and moral integrity. Edward Johnson had found his true wealth, not in the bank account, but at the library table where 5 different people. They committed to building something greater than the sum of their individual parts. The reconstruction would be difficult, but it would be honest, and it would be done as a family. December arrived with the emotional intensity that only the end of a cycle can provide. Edward watched from the window of his renovated office at the company, now equipped with transparent control systems that Mary had implemented with surgical precision. Over the past 6 months, Johnson Imports had been completely restructured, not only to meet legal requirements, but to operate according to ethical standards that made the company a reference in the industry. Gabriel, now 9 years old, had developed a simplified financial analysis system that identified irregularities with greater efficiency than specialized software. His method, based on pure logic and common sense, was later adapted by specialized consultants and implemented as the company's official protocol. Michael had created a complete digital archive of all corporate documentation, organizing 20 years of contracts, reports, and correspondence with librarian-like precision. Ryan designed a new logo for the company and created all the graphic communication materials, bringing visual humanity to a brand that had previously communicated only through numbers and legalese. "Mr. Johnson," Gabriel said during lunch on a Thursday, in the new family meeting room that Edward had created in the office, "can I make a suggestion about the new investments?" Edward nodded, placing complete trust in the analytical ability of the boy who had become his most reliable unofficial financial consultant. "The company is profitable again, but we are still focusing only on imports. How about we create a corporate education division? Clara could lead it, offering training in business ethics to other companies." The suggestion revealed impressive strategic sophistication. Gabriel was not just thinking about revenue diversification, but about the company's social mission. And why corporate education? Because we found that most business problems come from people who know how to make money, but don't know why they are doing it. Michael interjected, lifting his gaze from the business management book he was reading. "If we teach ethics along with techniques, we create better entrepreneurs." Moreover, Ryan added while sketching ideas for educational materials, "companies that do the right things attract better clients, more dedicated employees, and more reliable partners. It's good for everyone." Edward watched the 3 boys, now almost 9 years old, demonstrating a business understanding that senior executives took decades to develop. But it was not just technical intelligence, it was wisdom integrated with solid moral values. "Clara," Edward addressed the teacher who was attending the family meeting, "would you be interested in leading a corporate education program?" "Edward, it would be the realization of a professional dream. 50 years teaching children, and now the opportunity to educate adults who make decisions that affect thousands of people." "Mary, what's your financial analysis of the proposal?" Mary consulted spreadsheets she had prepared in advance. She was always 3 steps ahead in her analyses. "An initial investment of $200,000 to structure the department. Potential return of $1 million per year after the 3rd year if we secure 5 large corporate clients." "Approved," Edward decided immediately. "Let's create the Corporate Ethics Education Division." "With one condition," Gabriel added with seriousness beyond his years. "What?" 20% of the profits from this division must go to a scholarship fund for underprivileged children with exceptional talents, children like we were before we met you. The proposal hit Edward like a profound revelation. The triplets were not just thinking about business success, they were thinking about systemic social responsibility. "Gabriel, that's one of the smartest ideas I've ever heard." "It's not my idea," Gabriel replied modestly. "It's our idea. The 3 of us have been talking about this for weeks." And we concluded that our family has the responsibility to help other families like ours, Michael explained. Wasted talent is a crime against humanity. Ryan nodded vigorously. And when I draw, I always imagine other children who might have even better ideas than mine but will never get a chance to show them because they were born in the wrong place. Edward felt a deep emotion swell in his chest. In less than a year, 3 children had transformed his perspective on wealth, success, and social responsibility more radically than decades of formal education and business experience. That afternoon, Edward made a decision that surprised even the family. He called an extraordinary meeting with all the company employees, 83 people who had remained loyal during the crisis. Colleagues, he began, observing familiar faces that represented hundreds of families dependent on the company. This year has taught us valuable lessons about integrity, teamwork, and social responsibility. Therefore, I announce 3 important changes. First, all employees will become minority shareholders in the company. 10% of the capital will be distributed among you, proportionally to your time of service and demonstrated dedication. A murmur of surprise swept through the makeshift auditorium. Second, we are creating the Corporate Ethics Education Division, which will offer training in moral values to other companies, generating additional revenue and strengthening our social mission. Third, 20% of all future profits will be allocated to the Gabriel Michael Ryan Scholarship Fund, which will identify and educate underprivileged children with exceptional talents across the United States. The silence that followed was broken by applause that turned into a prolonged ovation. Henry Davis approached after the meeting, carrying an expression of respectful disbelief. Edward, in 30 years of my career, I have never seen a corporate restructuring based on moral principles rather than profit maximization. And what is your professional opinion about the changes? That you have completely lost your mind, Henry smiled, and that you are probably creating the most sustainable and innovative business model I have ever encountered. That night, the family gathered in the library for the ritual that had become sacred. A joint dinner followed by conversations about dreams, plans, and reflections on the day. Mr. Johnson, Ryan said while showing drawings of the company's new organizational structure, can I ask an important question? Always, Ryan. Are you truly happy now? Edward looked around. From the library, where 15 months earlier he read cold financial reports alone, the shelves now housed not only his business books but also hundreds of children's volumes, artworks created by Ryan, math projects from Gabriel, literary essays from Michael, and family photographs documenting the transformation of 5 isolated individuals into a cohesive and loving unit. Ryan, I am happier than I ever thought possible. And why is that? Because I discovered that true wealth is not having a lot of money. It's having people who make you want to use that money to create beautiful and useful things in the world. Michael closed the book he was reading and looked directly at Edward. So you finally understood the lesson, and from the Little Prince. What lesson? That one sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Edward felt tears of gratitude welling up in his eyes. At 44, a 9-year-old had poetically summed up the most important transformation of his life. Yes, Michael, I finally understand. And in the silent library of a mansion in Beverly Hills, Edward Johnson realized he had found something infinitely more valuable than money. He had found purpose, unconditional love, and the profound joy of contributing to the development of other human beings. His true fortune was not in the bank account, but sitting around the dining table, planning ways to make the world a better place for all children who, like the triplets, possessed extraordinary talents waiting for opportunities to flourish. January 2025 marked exactly 2 years since that rainy afternoon when Edward found 3 boys eating at his mahogany table. Now, watching Gabriel, Michael, and Ryan prepare for a presentation in the auditorium of Harvard on business ethics from the perspective of the new generation, Edward could hardly recognize the shy children he had discovered in his dining room. Gabriel, at 10, had developed a financial analysis program based on ethical principles that was being studied by universities, both in the US and internationally. His method identified not only mathematical irregularities, but also behavioral patterns indicating a lack of business integrity. Michael had become a natural speaker, able to explain complex concepts of moral philosophy through literary analogies that fascinated academic audiences. Ryan created infographics and visual materials that transformed dry data into emotionally impactful narratives about corporate social responsibility. "Mr. Johnson," Gabriel said as he adjusted the tie he would wear for the presentation, "are you nervous?" "A little," Edward admitted honestly. "It's not every day. My kids speak to university deans and CEOs of multinational companies." The word kids had become natural in his vocabulary over the past few months. The official adoption process had been completed in September 2024, with Marissa retaining legal custody, but Edward officially taking on the role of adoptive father. The ceremony at the courthouse had been small but deeply emotional, with Clara Smith serving as a witness, and the three boys insisting they wanted to keep the last name Silver but add Johnson as a compound surname. Gabriel Silver Johnson, Michael Silver Johnson, Ryan Silver Johnson, Edward had repeated. During the ceremony, feeling each name echo in his heart like music. The transformation was not limited to legal aspects. The mansion in Beverly Hills had become a true center of educational innovation. The Gabriel Michael Ryan Scholarship Fund was already benefiting 43 children from across the US, identified through a national program that detected exceptional talents in underprivileged communities. Clara Smith coordinated a team of 15 educators who developed personalized curricula for each beneficiary, always keeping the children in their communities of origin while providing intensive educational support. "Marissa," Edward said as he watched his wife. They had married. Civilly in October, in an intimate ceremony in the garden of the mansion. Review the final details of the presentation. "Are you sure they are ready for this?" Marissa, now the official CFO of Johnson Holdings, a company that had grown to include the original import division, the corporate education division, and the educational foundation, smiled with the maternal calmness she had learned to value above any other human quality. "Edward, they were born ready. They just needed opportunities to show who they have always been." The presentation at Harvard was a milestone in the life of the entire family. Gabriel began by explaining how simple mathematical principles could detect complex corporate fraud. Michael made connections between classic literature and modern ethical leadership. Ryan presented visualizations that transformed statistics about social inequality into moving visual narratives about wasted human potential. Business leaders and academics, Gabriel concluded his part of the presentation. "Our family has discovered that sustainable success only happens when companies take responsibility for the development of the communities where they operate. Literature teaches us that every truly important story is about moral transformation," Michael added. "Companies that ignore this principle may make money temporarily, but they lose historical relevance permanently. And when a company helps a talented child develop their potential," Ryan finished, projecting an image of the entire class of scholarship recipients from the fund, "it is not just investing in that child's future, it is investing in the future of all the people that child will positively impact throughout their life." The ovation was prolonged and sincere. Edward watched from the front row, alongside Marissa and Clara, feeling a paternal pride that transcended any professional satisfaction he had ever experienced. After the presentation, Dr. Robert Smith, the Dean of Harvard, approached the family. "Mr. Johnson, in 40 years of academic career, I have never witnessed such an eloquent demonstration of how quality education can transform not only individuals, but systemic perspectives on social responsibility." "Professor, the credit is entirely theirs," Edward replied, indicating the triplets who were conversing with college students, fascinated by their perspectives. "In fact, sir, the credit is for the family. Exceptional education only happens in an environment of unconditional love and high expectations. You created that." On the way home in the BMW that now transported 5 people instead of a solitary man, Ryan asked a question that would echo in Edward's mind for the following days. "Dad, Edward," though the word still caused deep emotion in Edward every time he heard it, "do you think our story will have a happy ending?" Edward looked in the rearview mirror at the 3 boys in the back seat. Gabriel organizing presentation notes, Michael reading a book on social pedagogy, Ryan drawing the skyline of Los Angeles that he observed through the window. "Ryan, our story won't have an ending. It will have a continuation." "What do you mean?" "Because you 3 will grow up, study at the best universities in the world, develop extraordinary careers, and teach your own children about social responsibility, moral integrity, and the importance of using personal talents to benefit others. And then your children will teach your grandchildren, who will teach your great-grandchildren, creating a lineage of people committed to making the world better. Our family will become a permanent force for good." Mary turned from the passenger seat, smiling with the same tenderness that had won Edward over during that first conversation in the apartment in East Los Angeles. "Edward is right. You are not just our children. You are seeds of a silent revolution that will transform how American families think about education, values, and social responsibility." Michael closed the book and looked thoughtfully out the window. "So our responsibility is greater than just being happy." "Much greater," Gabriel agreed. "Our responsibility is to prove that exceptional talents can come from anywhere, and that dedicated families can create opportunities that change the course of history." That night, in the library that had become the emotional heart of the mansion, Edward read to the family an email he had received during the afternoon. "Dear Johnson family, my name is Anna Smith. I'm 15 years old, and I have been a scholarship recipient from your fund for 2 years. Today, I was accepted at UCLA to study engineering with a full scholarship. I wanted to thank you not only for the educational opportunity, but for the example of family that you represent. You have taught me that true love is not just caring for those we already love, but expanding our circle of love to include people who need opportunities. When I graduate, I intend to create my own foundation to help other children like me. Thank you for showing me that a family can be a force for social transformation. With love and eternal gratitude, Anna Smith." The silence that followed was filled with deep emotion. "Edward," Mary said softly, "do you realize what we have achieved?" "What?" "We have created a legacy that will last forever. Anna Smith will help hundreds of other children, who will help thousands more, who will help millions more. Our family has started a chain reaction of kindness that will never stop." Edward looked around the library, where 2 years earlier he had taken refuge from loneliness by reading financial reports. Now, the walls displayed diplomas and certificates from the triplets, photographs of all the children benefited by the fund, thank you letters from families transformed by the educational program. "Do you know what the most incredible part is?" Edward said, embracing the 5 members of his family. It all started on a rainy afternoon when three boys decided to have lunch at a table where they weren't expected. And it ended, Gabriel added, with a family that discovered that true wealth is the ability to multiply opportunities for others. Ryan, always the artist of the family, had the final word. Actually, it hasn't ended. Our story is just beginning. And in the silent library of a mansion in Beverly Hills, where years before a lonely man accumulated material wealth, now a united family celebrated the discovery that the greatest treasure possible is the ability to transform the love received into opportunities offered to others. Edward Johnson had found his true fortune, a family that not only loved him unconditionally, but shared his vision of using personal privileges to create systemic social justice. The businessman who once measured success only in numbers now measured it in transformed lives, realized dreams, and developed potentials. And he discovered that this was a form of wealth that grew infinitely, because the more it was shared, the more abundant it became. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment, "I watched until here," and leave your opinion about this story. And don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen, because it's very emotional.